Welcome back to another episode of Performance That Matters. Today, very exciting episode for me. We get to talk about one of my most favorite topics in the whole wide world, and that is hydration science and how that affects performance. And we're joined by one of the world leaders in this area, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. We've got Dr. Stavros Kavouras. Dr. Stavros, thanks for coming on.
Yes, of course. It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. And I have to start by saying it's always a pleasure for me to talk about hydration. This is what I've been working on for a long time now. And it's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to discuss with people that they can use what we study in the laboratory.
Yeah, and I'm sure they will get a huge amount of information out of this episode. But Stavros, hydration, what got you into it? You've been studying it, like you said, for a long time. Very, very long time. All those years ago, what made you think, you know what, I want to dedicate my whole life and my career to this one topic?
Yeah, I can say a little lie or I can say the truth that, I grew up thinking of hydration as the hottest thing in the planet, which is not really true. I always liked the topic of hydration when I was an undergraduate student studying, etc. But the truth, motivation of being involved deeply with hydration research started in 1993 when I started my PhD with Professor Larry Armstrong. And Larry Armstrong was a professor at the University of Connecticut, and he's an ex-president of the American College of Sports Medicine. And he's one of the founders of hydration science. He has done a lot of work. I know many people might know of his work, but not of the name. He was the one who came up with the urine color chart that you might have seen some sort of version around the world. There are more and more places that I travel, and I usually take pictures and I text them back to Larry and say, "Hey, Larry, look at this. Like, this is your chart. I found it in a bathroom in Jakarta, for instance, or like all sorts of places around the planet." So the quick answer to your question is, like, I started working with Larry. The lab that I was doing my PhD was specializing on hydration. I got exposed to the research on hydration. And in that case, you know what happens? You either love it or hate it. And for me, I fell in love with the topic. And almost 32 years later, I still study hydration.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you've put out some amazing work that we'll no doubt get into. But for the listeners, Stavros, I want to take them through a bit of a logical sequence because I want to get into hydration and performance. But before we get there, I feel like we have to set the scene. We have to explain certain physiological concepts as they pertain to hydration because, like you and I both appreciate, hydration is a very simple concept, but it's a bit more complicated than what the average person would think, right?
You're exactly right. So I've heard people trying to oversimplify the concept of hydration and saying, hydration, you drink whenever you feel thirsty, you're good. It's like hydration, it's like oxygen. You don't think about breathing oxygen. We all know you need oxygen. And we all know if you don't have oxygen, you're gonna die in a few minutes. But you don't really have to do anything because your body will take as much oxygen as you need. So this is an oversimplification of the story because with water, it's not exactly the same. Your body will give you I guess, the red flag when you're very, very intensively thirsty or when you're even mildly thirsty, but the body doesn't have a mechanism to let you know that you need to drink more fluids to be optimally hydrated. Your body knows. The only issue is your body doesn't tell you that you're not optimally hydrated. So you have to become a little bit educated and smart on how to see those signals and use some tools potentially or some signs to make sure you're as much as possible throughout the day you stay optimally hydrated.
All right, so let's start our education. This is going to be an absolute masterclass in hydration. And let's start very, very front door. First question when we kick in the hydration manner, we go, what is our current best definition of being hydrated and then being dehydrated?
Yeah, this is an awesome question. So The complicated answer is like people say hydration is a state or hydration is a process. So what are we referring to? Even when you talk to in the scientific world, people quite disagree trying to wrap their head around hydration. They'll understand the importance and the concepts, but then trying to identify what is hydration. So I like to say that hydration is a process. It's something that you cannot achieve optimal hydration today and say, that's it, I'm good, I made it there, and I'm going to stay in that state, because it constantly fluctuates, especially if you are an athlete, when you are physically active and you are in that process of constantly producing metabolic heat, burning substrate, producing metabolic heat, and then sweating and losing water. So I like to say that hydration is a process. Hydration is being well hydrated being well hydrated. I would say is a state where your body has and you will see me saying this word over and over, adequately hydrated. So I'm not trying to say that, the more the merrier, which is not the truth. But how your body, it's a state where your body is adequately hydrated. So your body has the optimal amount of water that it needs. But we have to remember that hydration is a process that we almost constantly change throughout the day.
And how would that process change if we're trying to define what dehydration is then, doctor?
So dehydration, I think it's a little bit easier to define. Dehydration is when you have a water deficit. So where you lack of water to some degree. What we're not 100% sure to all agree what is the threshold that we call dehydration. And then you have heard words like dehydration or mild dehydration or significant dehydration. So it depends who you talk to. So and who is your person that you're referring to. And studies we call your volunteer or your subject, or whether you have a patient. So if you talk to a clinician and they have an older adult in a hospital, if that person has minus 5% dehydration, meaning they have lost 5% of their body weight in water, they call that a mild dehydration. They're like, it's a mild dehydration, we can treat it, it's not urgent, they're not going to die immediately. So we are okay. When you reach over 10%, so 12, 14%, then you're entering the zone where people can die from dehydration. This is a significant dehydration that people can die from complications associated with significant dehydration. So on the other side, when you're talking to an endurance athlete and you're looking at optimal hydration to work at your best, so to be able to perform at what your body can give you based on your training, your genes, your diet, your environment, everything, then minus 2%, it's a significant dehydration. Minus 5%, you have a massive decrease in, especially in aerobic type of exercise, like running marathon, running cycling races, running ultra races, etc. We know by now, I mean, my lab was one of the first ones that started showing data over and over that minus 1% of dehydration, with something technically minute amount of water deficit, can decline exercise performance. So we have data that even minus 1%, you're not at your best. But most people will agree, if you look at the literature and the guidelines, that by now we're a little bit older. They say you should try to avoid dehydration more than 2%. So giving the idea without saying it, that maybe 2% it's probably okay with in my opinion, it's not probably okay if you're an elite athlete and you're trying to gain absolutely every benefit that you want to have.
So, Dr. Kavouras, let's just say if we're going to summarize what is hydration and dehydration, we're going to say that hydration isn't exactly a single static state. It's quite a dynamic process. Like you said, our body's going to be moving fluid in and out, and we'll get into how our body actually stores and moves the fluid. And it's just about having the right amount of fluid to function optimally or properly in your words. And then when we talk about dehydration, there's a big range. There's a big range where you can have mild dehydration, where you can see detriments of even, like your lab shown, just 1% body weight loss, which is not very much at all. But then you get this scale all the way up to minus 10% body weight, which is very common in the world I live in when I work with elite level UFC fighters. We get 10, 12 plus percent. And then you look at that process and you go, oh my God, this is pretty extreme. So that's the scale of
But they
dehydration.
don't fight with 12%.
Absolutely
So
not.
the only thing that they have to perform, it's their task for the time is to walk and stand on the scale. And quite often we see lots of them. I have several videos that I often use for my classes. You have UFC fighters that they cannot stand still on their own without anybody assisting them. So you get major side effects when you're expecting to have the ultimate fighting machine. Somebody who is strong and can take punches and they can jump and they can kick and all this great stuff and fast reaction time. And then you have that human being that they lose 10% of their body weight. They cannot stand still for 3 seconds on the scale to measure their body weight. So there is nothing else in your body that will change by 10% and you won't be able to stand. There is nothing else. Think of your blood glucose. Your blood glucose can go up 2-3 times in one day, and we call it normal, by the way. So if your blood glucose is up to, let's say, 160, say you wake up in the morning, you have 80, and it goes 165 throughout the day, you know how we call it? Normal. We call it normal. This is normal blood glucose. It goes down, it goes up, it falls like up and down. And you know how much glucose you have in your blood? You have about 3 grams. You know what is 3 grams? It's 12 calories. I like to say that if I blink my eyes fast for a few minutes, I can burn those 12 calories. I mean, obviously, you have the liver that constantly supply glucose. But my point, the point that I'm trying to make is like we have glucose, we have so little, and your body can fluctuate it so much. And then you have water. You have more than 50% of your body being water. You have 30 kilos of water at least. And then you lose 700 grams and you start decrease your performance. You lose, I don't know, you're 70 kilos. You lose 7 kilos. You cannot stand. This is crazy.
That's the point I was going to make as well, Stavros, is that you can get down to 10, 12%. And I'll tell you, I've done it with hundreds and hundreds of athletes, but even walking is a challenge after that. Even getting those guys to blink their eyes 3 times and burn 6 calories is a bit of a challenge when you're that dehydrated. But Stavros, that's a good segue. Let's move into this and let's start talking about how our body actually stores water, because a lot of people don't think about it, right? You grab your cup of water, you put it in your mouth, you swallow it, you can feel it go down your esophagus, and then we don't really think, hey, where does that water actually go? Can you explain that? When we drink water, what happens to it and where do we store it throughout the body?
Yep. And so this is what happened when you drink water. It goes down to your stomach and to your intestines. So you get what we call gastric emptying and intestinal absorption. So it goes through the stomach and it starts being absorbed. The absorption for water, for beverages in general, it's fairly quick. So fluids can be absorbed very, very quickly. And the fluids gets absorbed and everything makes it into the circulation, so into our bloodstream and into the veins and the arteries. And then from there, it moves from the circulation, it moves in a space that is in between the cells and the blood, which is called interstitial space. So then from that space, it transfers into the cells. So there are 3 separate pools. We like to lump them into 2 bigger areas. We call them intracellular and extracellular. So intracellular is all the water that we have within the cells, and this is the grand majority of body water. And the extracellular, which a small portion is within the blood, what we call plasma water or blood water, and then a larger proportion, which is the interstitial space, which probably if you had to visualize it, I would say whatever water you have under your skin and in between your cells, but outside of all the vessels in your body. The interstitial water or the interstitial space is where the water that comes when we sweat. So when we sweat, it goes through that. So when you drink something, all these things are happening at the same time. So water goes down to your stomach, it starts being absorbed, it goes to the circulation inside the vasculature. From there, it moves to the interstitial space, it transfers into the cells, and all this process can be very quick. So there have been studies where uh, people use stable isotopes like deuterium. So it's a rare type of hydrogen. So you can buy this very expensive water that is labeled with deuterium. You drink a little bit, and then you can measure how quickly it goes into the blood, into the interstitial space, and out in the sweat. So you can take a sample of sweat and you can measure the water that you just had. How long did it take to appear in your sweat? So there are data showing that even within less than 15 minutes, you can see sweat being produced from the water that you just drink.
So there's fluid state in different compartments all over our body, and that's there all the time. Like you said earlier, about 50 to 60% of our body has this fluid in all different compartments that's constantly flowing and moving and shifting throughout our body. Is that correct?
That's exactly. I think that's a good way to summarize it. So the water goes everywhere. Some people think I drink water, I pee water. So there is no direct connection from your stomach to your kidneys. So it has to go through the circulation and everything. So there's most of the water, as I mentioned earlier, it goes into the cells, and there's cells everywhere. So the blood transfers all that water that we drink, and then it distributes it everywhere. It goes from the blood into the interstitial space, because most of the cells are not in the blood. They're the red blood cells and the white blood cells, so very few cells into the blood. So some water will go in there, but most of the water will go interstitial space and then being transferred into the cells around the body, like muscle cells, is because most of our body also is muscle, and most of the muscle volume, it is water. So a large percent of what we drink ends up in the muscle tissue.
Now, I'm sure people listening that can probably appreciate, like you said, it's not like we just drink a cup of water, then all of a sudden we just run to the bathroom and pee. But sometimes if we drink a lot of water really fast, we do find ourselves going to the bathroom. So there's some obvious physiological mechanisms that are controlling this process, because we can't just balloon up and continually drink water. Bad things will happen. If we're short on water, our body has to conserve it. Can you talk us through this crazy system that our body has developed and the physiological mechanisms to control how much water we have in our body?
Absolutely. So there is a quite complex physiological mechanism. I'll try to describe it as simply as it gets, probably, so I won't lose most of the people. And also in the previous question on how where it goes, how it transfers, I also oversimplified it, because there is more than a dozen of different transporter mechanism. We call them aquaporins, that those receptors, they're everywhere pretty much in our body. We have like aquaporins in the bone. So did you know that bone has a lot of water? I don't know if you've seen any animal bone, like chicken bone. If you take a bone that it's hard to break, if you let it dry for a few days and then you touch it, it breaks in no time. So dry bones are very easy to dry. So it's not only, water plays a role in structure as well, makes bones stronger, for example, having a lot of water. But to answer your question, what is the main physiology and how it works? So the main hormone, if there is one thing that you would like to remember at the end of this podcast, probably it should be remember the hormone that comes with two names. It's called antidiuretic hormone, and also has another name, which is called vasopressin. So both of those names are referring to the same molecule, which is a small hormone secreted by the posterior pituitary. It's produced a little bit higher in the brain, a little bit above the hypothalamus. And what this hormone does, based on the name antidiuretic, it it decreases diuresis, so it decreases urinary output. So the way that it works, antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin is the hormone that is the first line of defense when we start losing fluids or when we're not drinking enough. So what our body does, it secretes that hormone, and this hormone, one of the main effects that this hormone has, it decreases urinary output. So actually what it really does, as the blood gets filtered through the kidneys, as the plasma gets filtered through the kidneys, it increases the water reabsorption from the kidney vasculature in the interstitial space and back to the body. So the amount of urine that we produce, that is pretty much water that we waste, it's significantly smaller. So if you're not drinking enough, or if you exercise and you're sweating and you lose a lot of fluids, and and your body is not adequately hydrated, then your body increases that hormone, the antidiuretic hormone. You're not peeing as much. And when you pee, when it comes time to pee, your urine is very concentrated because your body is trying to extract as much as possible water molecules out of the urine that is being produced.
So, Stavros, just from that process, just summarize that again. We've got that antidiuretic hormone, which is also called vasopressin, that comes from our posterior pituitary gland. And the role of that is to decrease our urinary output. And this will get released when we're either losing a lot of fluid or not drinking enough. And the body says, hey, we need to conserve the fluid that we have. Is it then fair to say then, Stavros, that when this happens or when someone sees dark urine, does that necessarily mean they're dehydrated, or is their body just conserving the water that they have, or how do you interpret that?
This is a fantastic question, and this is something that I've been working for many years to answer this question. So when your urine is concentrated, it definitely means that you have higher levels of arginine vasopressin. That's why the urine is more concentrated. So your body is trying to conserve water. So the question that I would like to ask to clarify what you asked is, does dark urine automatically means dehydration or not?
Correct.
Which we have to go back to the original question. What is dehydration? And I said, this is easy to answer. Dehydration is significant water deficit. So your body does not have adequate amount of water. So so what your body does, as soon as you don't drink for a period of time, as soon as you lose a minute amount, that probably it's so small, it's even before the 1% of dehydration, your body produces that hormone, and it's trying to maintain your body fluids at an optimal rate. So so what happened when this hormone gets increased, you immediately start seeing darker urine, and the more dehydrated you become, and the more vasopressin that your body is producing, the darker the urine becomes. So the thing that is quite particular with this hormone, and I'm careful trying to explain it without confusing the audience, is this: is whether you lose 1.5 or 2% of your body weight, which is relatively a small or what we call mild degree of dehydration, or even if you lose 10% of dehydration, your urine is dark. Maybe in 10%, it's significantly darker. But at some point, your ability of your kidney to concentrate urine, it maxes out. So many times we see dark urine without really being significantly dehydrated, and quite often without even being -2%, and often not even -1% dehydration. So let me stay with me. Let me try to explain something that I've been trying to present for many years now in the literature And there is more and more evidence right now that this is what is happening. So when these guidelines came out and people start talking about dilute urine, that is a sign that your body is working well, that you're well hydrated, etc., not dark urine, etc., all the guidelines came out as light urine, and we have cutoff values for urine specific gravity or urine osmolality, different biomarkers to indicate how concentrated your urine is. We said when your urine is diluted, means you're optimally hydrated. What we don't really know is that whether the opposite is true. So, does the dark urine by default means that you're dehydrated? So the answer is no. When we take the definition of dehydration, that you have a significant water deficit, because this is the definition of dehydration. So the concept that I've been trying to disseminate a little bit more and make people aware, and there is more and more data that this is true, is that there is a phase between of you becoming dehydrated, but you're not optimally hydrated, where your urine start getting dark and your body is already producing vasopressin, but you don't have a significant water deficit. And this state, we call it underhydration. So I like to make the paradigm of comparing underhydration a little bit more than something like pre-diabetes. So you're not really diabetic, but it's a red flag. It's like the yellow light in the traffic light. You're not in the red. You went with yellow, which is probably almost okay. So the bigger question that I'm trying to ask all the time is like, are you okay to be in that zone of underhydration, where you're not drinking that much, but you drink enough not to be really dehydrated? So you're not going to be dizzy. You're not going to have like major side effects, acute side effects. You're not going to die by any means. But is that okay for long-term health? Is it okay to have constantly elevated vasopressin? And I can answer right now. We have tremendous amount of data by now that living in that state of underhydration, where your blood biomarkers are not elevated to be really diagnosed as being dehydrated. This is a state where you're really decreasing, obviously, your performance, but you also decrease your functionality as a human being. Long-term health effects: diabetes, hypertension, chronic disease, chronic kidney disease. And we have published data even with life expectancy. People that they live in that underhydrated state, they live shorter.
Wow. And that's an amazing point to make, Stavros, because what I want to get across to the listeners here, and hopefully it's coming across here, is that hydration is way more complicated than what we give it credit for. And you do hear a lot of people. I have clients every day that I consult and they go, "Oh, I'm extremely dehydrated. My urine was dark." And it's like, well, that's very context dependent. What was the big light bulb moment for me in my career, Stavros, was two moments. Is when I realized that, hey, it's actually a very good sign when I'm working with these top level UFC fighters and we've done a specific acute dehydration protocol where we're trying to get 10, 12% of their body weight gone, but then they wake up in the morning and they still urinate. Of course, it's going to be dark. They're very dehydrated. But at least to me, I could say, hey, at least everything's still working in there. At least their body's still doing what it's meant to be doing. Yes, it's dark and we don't want to be here for very long, but it's still working. And then when we started working with a lot of elite level ultra endurance runners that run 24 plus hours, 100-mile events, 400-kilometer events, 10-day events, where we thought, okay, we've got to keep the urine clear. No. Even if the urine's dark, acutely, that's okay. At least their kidneys are working. It's a lot better that you're peeing and then something's coming out than not at all. And that was very interesting. And I think it just proves this point that, yes, in an ideal world, there's this fluxing capacity of our body where we want to stay in these little compartments of, okay, this is probably hydrated, this is dehydrated, and our body has these mechanisms to keep us in there, and we could probably push it a bit further. You just don't want to stay there for too long. Like you just said, you've got good long-term data just for everyday health. If you stay in this underhydrated state for so long, a lot of bad things happen. But it's a lot more complicated when you know that, Stavros, and hopefully everyone listening that goes, hey, that's a bad thing. But then how does the everyday person figure that out? And maybe looking at your urine is or isn't the best way to do so.
Actually, urine has can give you a lot of information, and I really like the urine biomarkers in the lab setting, and also the urine, not really biomarkers, but to pay attention to your urine, because the urine can give you a lot of information without doing much analysis. So I mean, we can go directly to the take-home message, to be honest, since we started talking about vasopressin and all these things, and how your body fluids are regulated. But one of the things that happen is that vasopressin decreases urinary output. So it does two things. It decreases the amount of urine that comes out, so you don't pee as often, because humans start feeling the urge to pee when you have at least 350 ml of urine in your bladder. This is when you start feeling like, I'm probably have to go to the bathroom now, have to pee now. And you can hold much more than this. Like males can hold, if they absolutely need, they can hold maybe up to 1 liter of urine. This is the max, probably, if you're a bigger size, etc. Women a little bit smaller. Um, but how much you pee and how dark is your urine, these are the two best biomarkers that for everyday people you can use to assess how well hydrated you are. And actually, we have done several studies looking specifically on how, trying to quantify the combination of how often you pee and how light is your urine. So one of the things that we found, if you pee at least 7 times a day, which is approximately every 2 to 3 hours, and if your urine is quite diluted, it's almost 100% guarantee that you're optimally hydrated. So this is probably the simplest advice when people ask me, what can I do to make sure I'm well hydrated? I think this is pretty close to the simple thing. You don't have to have a wearable technology device, which, by the way, there is none really accurate to measure hydration right now. Um, you don't need to write down how much you drink and how much you lose constantly all day long, every day, because nobody's going to do that. Just keep in mind, are you going to the bathroom? You're in your office all day. How many times did you go to the bathroom today? Did you go once? You're not doing well. You need to drink more. Are you going every 15 minutes? Then you're really overdoing it. Take it easy. You don't have to drink so much. You don't have to drink. I don't know. If you're in the office not doing anything, the room is cold, you don't need to drink a gallon per day being physically inactive and looking at a computer screen all day long.
This is a really good segue then, Stavros, and just summarizing that is that, okay, hydration, quite complicated how our body handles it. For the everyday person, checking what color your urine is probably a pretty good sign. What about when people say, hey, you know what, if you're just sitting around, just go with your thirst. But then we hear people come back and say, yeah, but once you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. Can you explain to us what this relationship is between the plasma vasopressin, which we discussed earlier, which rises when we start becoming dehydrated and our body says, hey, we need to conserve some of this water. What's the relationship between that process and then our brain telling us, hey, you're thirsty, go drink? Is that a reliable measure?
Yeah, this is a good idea. Good segue. So let me do one thing. I know so people will follow. So let me explain what is osmolality. So osmolality, that we measure it quite often in the urine and in the blood, it's an indication, it's a variable that we measure in a laboratory setting that indicates how concentrated the water component of your blood is. So we take out the cells, we keep the watery part of the blood, and we measure how concentrated your blood is, how concentrated the plasma or the serum is. So this is primarily influenced by the electrolyte content and by sugar content, your blood glucose content. So when you're getting dehydrated, your blood becomes more concentrated. So for some reason, you, especially with exercise associated dehydration, you lose a lot of water from your plasma, from your blood. So blood becomes more concentrated, blood osmolality increases. So your body has osmoreceptors in many places, and it constantly measures osmolality. When osmolality starts going up, this is the first signal for antidiuretic hormone to be secreted. So this is what your body knows. So as soon as plasma osmolality goes up, your body tells you, produce antidiuretic hormone right now. Let's close the doors, close the gates so we don't lose any extra water as much as possible. But thirst, so the issue with thirst versus what your body knows and what you know, what I like to say, is that your body knows. So you start producing vasopressin, your urine starts getting dark already, but you're not thirsty. So you're living in that situation that I like to call the underhydration stage without you knowing that you are in that stage because you're not thirsty yet. So the more you don't drink because you're not thirsty, the more concentrated your blood gets, the higher the vasopressin gets, and then at some point you will catch up and you start getting thirsty. So people like to say that you're not thirsty until you get dehydrated. I would say that you're not thirsty until your body really needs water. So it doesn't let you know immediately. It takes a little bit longer. So the question that I would like to answer, which is another question, is do we have a design flaw as machines? Are we designed ineffectively so we don't get thirsty quickly? Is that something that we should have been designed in a different way that we will get thirsty immediately or not? And I will stop here for a second. I don't know if you would like to summarize or to clarify anything before I answer the second question.
Just to bring it home for the guys listening, because again, it's a lot and I appreciate it's a lot, but I want to set the scene for what we're going to talk about a bit later when it comes to performance, because this stuff's very important to know. What we're saying so far, Dr. Stavros, is that there's this zone of being hydrated and then flowing into dehydrated. Initially, once that happens, the osmolality of the blood, which is the concentration of the water component of the blood, will go up. Once that goes up, that will signal for vasopressin. Our osmoreceptors will pick up that. That'll signal for vasopressin, which is the hormone that says, hey, conserve, shut the doors, we need to keep this fluid. That will go up. And then what that will cause eventually is kick that cascade off what we spoke about earlier, where the urine will become a bit darker because we're holding on. And this can happen even at 1% dehydration. But
Or
now,
even before that.
okay. And then
Or even
now,
before that, you could be in your office and just sitting there for hours, for a couple of hours, you're not drinking anything. Your body will start, it almost will start increasing osmolality a little bit and will start, your body is using water even though you don't see it. You evaporate a little bit.
so even for that person that's sitting in the office, Stavros, that say they aren't drinking anything, they aren't losing anything, they're just sitting in the office, it's cool, like you said. Could this process be happening, but then they're becoming more dehydrated because the intake's not there, but then the thirst will only come a bit later on? Is that what we're saying?
That's exactly what we're saying. Exactly. So maybe in that first stage, and I think some people get confused, they say this is not dehydration because if you indeed measure, I don't know, with whatever instruments we have, total body water hasn't really changed that much. You don't have, I don't know, 1% or 2% dehydration, but your body perceives that you're not drinking enough and then is trying to conserve water. So this is the underhydration state. This is the state where your plasma osmolality start going up a little bit, not out of the physiological range. Your vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone is increased. Your urine gets dark, but you're not even thirsty, so you don't know it. Your body does. You don't.
Can we then say that instead of just saying you're hydrated, dehydrated, we can then break that up where you're on top of your fluid needs, you're drinking, like you said, pretty regularly, you're going to the bathroom every 2 to 3 hours, every time you urinate, it's quite dilute. You go, oh, okay, I'm good. I must be pretty hydrated. If that's not you, if you're just sitting around doing what we're doing, podcasting, we're not taking anything in, we can first go into the state initially called the underhydrated state, where we'll probably see some darker urine. That's the underhydrated state. And then if we don't address that there, we'll then further move into what we're saying is dehydration. And that's probably when we're going to be feeling thirsty. But again, we've moved past the underhydrated state, which is past what our optimal is. And then we move into the dehydrated. And that can happen anywhere, even before 1% dehydrated, we're probably underhydrated. And as we move further along that scale, we're becoming dehydrated. Is that where we're at right now, Stavros?
That's correct. That's correct. And I think the problem that comes, so okay, it happens for a few hours, is not the end of the world. The problem is that when you start getting into the farther from into underhydration, then you drink a little bit, your mouth wets, you swallow a little bit. You probably know all these tricks. If you try to make people lose 10% of their body weight in 1 or 2 days, they know exactly what they need to do. You know how to cheat the system, and we figure out very effective ways to cheat your thirst perception and everything. You rinse your mouth, you swallow a little bit. Actually, swallowing is a very potent way to decrease thirst. If you swallow a tiny amount, thirst goes away. So what I'm trying to say, let's say a scenario, you woke up in the morning, you did a light workout at home, like, I don't know, 30 minutes running in the treadmill. You had very little fluid for breakfast. You go to your office, you sit around for most of the day. And then at lunch, you're like, yeah, I'm getting a little bit thirsty. You drink a little bit more, but you don't give what your body needs. So you keep staying for prolonged period of time. You go, you have an afternoon workout, you get into dehydration, then you rehydrate a little bit. So many people are constantly not in that optimal state, not in the dehydration constantly state, but they're somewhere down here. So they're in the underhydration state, and they often dip into dehydration when they have a challenge. Go outside in the heat and walk, or run somewhere, do a practice, or do some work, do something physical. So living in this underhydration state, you're much closer to dip into the red zone that I like. I like to use the green, yellow, and red light paradigm. Green, you're optimally hydrated. Yellow, you're underhydrated. Red, you're in the dehydration. So much closer to get into the red light. If you're already in yellow, you're almost there. You're not there maybe, but you're almost there.
All right. I think we've pretty much set the scene here, Stavros. The last question, which a lot of people will be interested to hear the answer, is what role does sodium play in all this? And I think once we answer this, we can probably get into the performance stuff. And the reason I ask is because you see a lot of sports drinks. If you do any endurance sports, if you do any ultra endurance, everyone will say, hey, just drink this sodium drink because it helps with your hydration. But why are we suggesting that? What role is sodium playing in all of this?
Yeah, sodium, first of all, it's a significant electrolyte. So it's probably the single most significant electrolyte in our body. So if you measure all the electrolytes in the blood in the extracellular, so the water blood, I'm sorry, the water component of the blood, which is outside of the cells, we have mostly sodium. So just to get an idea, we have, let's say, 140 milliequivalent per liter of sodium in the plasma, and we have 4 milliequivalent of potassium, for instance. So sodium is very important. Sodium triggers every signaling message that goes across the body. So we have sodium and potassium uh, circulating between cell membranes and sending messaging. It regulates cell volume, blood volume. It has like so many functions. Like if you change sodium too much, you can die fairly quickly from hyponatremia. If you go on the other side, it can trigger a lot of other things. So it's critical importance to be balanced and being in normal range. And actually, our body has mechanisms to manage it in a very, very tight range. So you rarely find people to be over or under, actually, to be honest. As far as hydration goes, sodium can help in absorbing faster. You have heard, and we like to say that water follows sodium because sodium is very osmotically active. So when your body absorbs sodium, then it absorbs a lot of water at the same time. Also, sodium helps your body to hold more water. If you look into hydration or rehydration, what happens? I was explaining earlier that you drink water and plasma osmolality is what regulates vasopressin, or one of the main things that regulates. I keep using the word vasopressin, which is antidiuretic hormone. It's more widely used, probably. That's why. But what happens when you drink plain water, your plasma osmolality decreases. If the plasma osmolality decreases, vasopressin decreases, so you start peeing more. If you take a salty solution, if you drink something that has a lot of sodium, for instance, plasma osmolality will remain a little bit higher, and as a response, vasopressin will not decrease as much. So for a few hours, your body will hold the water a little bit more effectively if you have sodium versus if you don't have sodium in that electrolyte. So if you do rehydration studies of 1, 2, 3, 4 hours immediately after a large bolus of fluid, you will see that sodium drives better water retention, which is in some cases is a desirable outcome. Of course, your body will figure out at some point what happens with the extra sodium and like, hey, we have way too much sodium. You can get rid of it. There are hormones that regulate that level. So you can, at some point, you can get rid of the extra sodium if you're over consuming a lot of sodium.
Sodium, very, very important electrolyte throughout the body. It's in our plasma volume, which is the water component of the blood. It's there in far greater quantities compared to, say, the other electrolytes, say potassium. A lot higher sodium than there is potassium. You said 140 milli equivalents compared to just 4 of potassium, so much, much higher. And then that concentration of the sodium will change based on how much water is in that water component of the blood. And then our body will respond through vasopressin to tell our body whether to retain or release the fluid. For example, if you have plain water without the sodium, that'll decrease our vasopressin, increase our urinary output. But if you have water with the sodium, that'll increase the vasopressin and assist your body in retaining the fluid. Is that correct?
I would say 99%. Probably won't increase vasopressin, but it won't suppress vasopressin as much as if you just drink plain water. So that's why, especially when we have a significant water deficit, like the case of a UFC fighter that loses significant percent of their body weight, you definitely need some electrolytes because you want them to retain that water. You want that water to be absorbed quickly, and you want that water to go back in the cells and everything quickly. So you want your kidneys to start working effectively and pee more dilute urine, etc. To be honest, in that case, you don't want to be in that super high vasopressin, very concentrated urine situation, but you also want to have fast rehydration. And just to emphasize this is if you look at the World Health Organization oral rehydration solution, that recipe has been developed now for probably 60 years, I would say. It's quite high in sodium, actually, and it also contains a small amount of glucose because glucose with sodium get absorbed quickly, and then water follows, and you have very rapid rehydration. So in the case of somebody who has significant dehydration and you want to have a rapid response, electrolytes are really beneficial.
And just touching on that, Stavros, we see this a lot, especially when I go to the USA for some reason. A lot of the sports drinks will be very high in potassium, but not so much in the sodium. Can you use a drink that is higher in potassium or higher in the other electrolytes, or is it mainly sodium to drive that response you just spoke about?
Sodium seems to be, I would say, the key ingredient, and this is what Most studies have concentrated. Lately, we see more blends of other amino acids together with sodium and potentially even some, I'm sorry, other electrolytes, I meant to say, and some amino acids, by the way, together with electrolytes to increase rehydration. So we recently actually did a study where we presented in the American College of Sports Medicine conference, and we saw a combination of high sodium with high potassium seems to be an effective way to have rapid rehydration. So we are not at the stage that I can really say that potassium is bad. Potassium alone, I think it would not be very effective if you use mainly potassium for rehydration beverage. But potentially combination of sodium with some potassium, it might be more beneficial than only giving sodium in a rehydration drink.
Stavros, I think we've set the scene pretty well. And for the remaining time, if you don't mind, if we could focus on how we put all this complex theory together for the athletes or the practitioners listening who work with athletes to how we can optimize performance. And I think the first place to start is if we go all the way back to where we're talking about the body weight loss and we're talking about, okay, well, this is fine for someone sitting in the office or doing what you and me are doing right now. We're just having a chat and we're not really sweating, doing anything. But what about the guy that goes out and runs for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, who knows, 6 hours plus, and they're constantly losing fluid and they're constantly going to be sweating? Can we just start there? And can you tell us, how do we determine how much of body weight percent loss the body can withstand and still maintain performance? And are there strategies that we can use to limit that? Or where are you at with all of that?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question, and I've done a lot of work with hydration and exercise performance over the years. Uh, so I think the literature is quite clear, especially when we talk about endurance events that the performance is highly depending on ample supply of energy and oxygen. So your cardiovascular system works a lot. So you need to have to maintain high oxygen uptake throughout the exercise. So running marathons, ultras, cycling, any events, triathlons, etc., that they last for hours, um, optimal hydration is the key to success. And I know in some cases it could be quite challenging to be to minimize water deficit uh, to less than 2%, but I would say this should be the goal, to be very, very close. I would say, if you're asking me, I would say not more than -1%. And I would say that even -1% of body weight loss, it has been associated with significant decrease in exercise performance. We have seen that over and over. We have done it in many different studies. We have taken cyclists, because cycling is a particular sport where, especially climbing, when you do climbing events like, uh, mountainous stages and Tour de France and all the Grand Tours, you're going up. So the concept at some point was, maybe if I am in cycling, because I'm carrying my weight up the hill, if I carry a little bit extra weight, so can I lose 1% and maybe go faster? Because if I can produce the same amount of power output for lighter body weight, then I'm going faster because my power per kilogram of body weight has went up, which is logically, it's a good idea. Physiologically, it's not. So we've done a couple of studies. Other people have repeated similar studies and they have similar findings. And we know that even 1% of dehydration results in sacrificing performance. So my suggestion would be, try to stick very close to your body weight and trying to minimize as much as possible water deficit. So the question that will be now would be, how do you do that, and how much you lose, and how do you do all the calculations, and I'll be happy to go into this conversation as well.
Before we get there, Stavros, let's just dive into what's happening so we can tie all this together. Are we saying then, when you're exercising for these long periods of time, even short periods of time, if you're sweating a lot, you're obviously then changing the balance of the water and the electrolytes in the body. And is that what we're trying to prevent with our hydration strategies? Are there any specific measures, say your plasma volume that we spoke about early, the osmolality, the concentration of the electrolytes? Are they the things that are driving the decrease in performance, Stavros, or is it just the total body water coming down?
I think to a big extent, when you exercise in the heat, when you do the exercise-induced dehydration, uh, one of the main targets that you lose water, which is the most precious place that you should try to sustain the water, is your plasma water. So the amount of water that you have in your blood. When you start getting dehydrated, even with 1% and 2%, you shrink your blood volume. So you lose water and your blood becomes a little bit more concentrated. So what happened, your heart, to be able to push the same amount of blood, will have to work a little bit harder. So we see that in every single study. When you do submaximal exercise, then your heart rate goes up. So you do the exact same exercise, and your heart rate could be 10, 15, 20 beats per minute higher. We published a study actually maybe 25 years ago. I think we published it in 1997 with walking exercise in the heat. We took people, we induced 3% of dehydration, and we saw difference in their heart rate in the heat chamber standing. Before we even started exercise, the heart rate was up by about 5 beats per minute. And then they were walking, it was brisk walking in a treadmill in a small incline. And towards the end of the 90 minutes exercise, we had 20 beats per minute higher just walking in the treadmill. So dehydration shrinks your blood volume and it pushes your cardiovascular system more. So this is what happens when you do submaximal type of exercise. So you see that if you're doing like ultra events, that you're not running at your 90% of your VO2 max, you're in a lower level, but you sustain this for longer events. When you do high intensity exercise, and you're very close to your max heart rate. Obviously, if your max heart rate, let's say it's 195, you cannot go 210 to compensate. So what happens, your total, what we call cardiac output, the amount of blood that your heart is pushing to the muscles and everywhere in your body every minute, it 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 ends up declining. So there is no room to compensate. You cannot increase the rate of your heart beating any farther. So your ability to distribute oxygen to the muscle and nutrients, it goes down, and as a response, the exercise performance declines.
So,
And there are
Stavros,
many other things that happen at the same time, but the big one is shrinking blood volume decreases your ability to consume oxygen and deliver oxygen to the muscle tissue, and as a response, performance goes down.
Stavros, I'll throw this one at you. So we said earlier that we have the underhydrated zone, which is usually the dark urine, but you're not quite yet thirsty. And then as you lose more, you move into that dehydrated zone where you become thirsty. Where in that spectrum is the plasma volume decreasing?
Yeah, with exercise, there are a couple of things that happen at the same time. So with exercise, you start losing fluids. If you're not drinking enough, you start losing fluids quickly. And most people, and if you're an endurance athlete, you know it well. I'm a hydration expert. I call myself, you know, a hydration expert. I'm an avid cyclist, and I go out, especially during the weekend, for long rides. I rarely drink enough to be like less probably than 2% of dehydration. So your brain is not designed, if you drink on your own, to consume enough to stay optimally hydrated. So when you exercise, you're progressively getting dehydrated. So I think fairly quickly you dig into the dehydration, the real dehydration area. The underhydration, I think, during exercise is rarely there during the events. Underhydration, it's something that happens to athletic population, maybe after exercise, maybe between practices, maybe days that they're resting, but not when they're into the race and into uh, serious training, etc. Almost everybody dips into the real dehydration segments. So the question is how deep they go. Do they go to just 1 or 2%? Do they go deeper? That then you have really significant decrements in exercise performance.
Stavros, before we get into the strategies, because you said there when you're not drinking enough, and we need to address that and go, well, how much is drinking enough and how do we do it? How do we explain then if we're saying, okay, we want to keep this within 2% body weight loss? When we look at Gabriel Salesi, for example, I think it's the Dubai Marathon at 2008, and that data says, was it 8% body weight depleted when he crossed the finish line? How do we explain that?
So this is a good question. So let me unfold a couple things. So first of all, how much you lose. Um, this is, and for some people, it sounds very daunting and very very difficult to assess how much you lose. Most people want to know, tell me how much to drink, how often, I'll do it, done. It just doesn't work this way. It just doesn't, it's not, it's like if I'm asking you, tell me what running shoe size should I buy? And I don't even want to try any shoes. You tell me a size, I go buy it, I put it on, and I run a marathon. Buddy, it doesn't work this way. You have to try the shoes, you have to practice with the shoes, you have to try different types of shoes, and then you figure out which one of the shoes is the best. So hydration, it's a little bit similar in a sense. You have to figure out what are the types of how much you lose, first of all, and how much you need to drink during exercise. And that amount is not the same all the time. So if you go faster versus if you do a practice, if you're in a hot and humid environment versus if you're in a cold environment or in an altitude, it could be different. So you have to figure out, first of all, how much you sweat. And the difficulty in some the difficulty that we have is that not everybody sweats equally. So you might be doing the exact same thing with somebody else. And at the population level, you could probably come up with some equations. And we all have seen different equations that you can predict how much you should drink because you lose that much based on intensity, environmental conditions, etc. But there are some large differences between people. There are what we call the heavy sweaters, people that they sweat a lot. And then you have people that are not as heavy sweaters, for instance. You can get even more complicated. Some people sweat a lot of electrolytes in their sweat. Their sweat could be very concentrated, and some people not. So you have to assess that and figure out what would be your own individualized, what I like to say, your individual hydration strategy. What is your individual hydration protocol? You don't go in a race and say, okay, I'm going to pick up the race of Gebre Selassie, for example, in that race, and this is what I'm going to do, because it's not going to fit for you. You might be able to do it for the first 10K and then collapse. So you have to figure out what your body needs and what would be the best for you. So to also make a comment on specific athletes. So there are some people that they can sustain without significant decrement on their exercise performance some degree of dehydration. So we know that there are some people that are less vulnerable. There is nobody that is immune to dehydration. So if you take 100 people and you dehydrate 100 people to like, let's say 2 to 3%, everybody's performance is going to go down. So the question is, will everybody's performance decrease by X%? And the answer is no. Some people are way more sensitive. They can lose, I don't know, 1.5%, 2%, and they can lose significant percent of their performance. And other people maybe a little bit less. But for everybody, there is a negative impact. Now, when you go to race events, like people running marathon, and marathon, if you realize, when somebody runs at the pace of like somebody who runs very close to 2 hours a marathon. So somebody is going 21 kilometers per hour. Try to do that at home. Try to, set your treadmill. If your treadmill can reach 21 kilometers an hour, and trying to drink while you're running 21 kilometers an hour, and trying to see how much you can drink. This is a very pragmatic and difficult task. So many of those runners, they try to figure out what is the least they can drink and get around without having a significant decrement in their performance. So -8%, it's pretty extreme, I would say, for endurance event. Um, we probably know the case of another now non-popular runner uh, that worked for Nike, that he had massive sweating rate, back in the 80s, and he ran the 1984 Olympics in LA, and his sweating rate was nearly 4 liters per hour. So it was impossible to sustain uh, any fluid intake that you would not have a significant dehydration. So he will finish races, and he will finish a race with close to -10% dehydration. Uh, there are some people like that they lose massive amount of, or no matter how much they drink, they cannot stick to -1 or 2%, not even close. And especially when you run at the super fast paces. So the question is, what can you sacrifice? You sacrifice some fluids, you sacrifice some pace. You cannot stop to drink. It's not an ultra event that they stop and they eat and they drink and then they continue. This is a little bit easier running modality to hydrate better for longer events. But for marathons, it's somebody who is very dehydration sensitive will not run to buy marathon. That's it. We'll run only cold marathons. Look at the Central European marathons in fall and winter.
So this brings me to two parts, but let's address that last statement we just said there, Stavros. Just to summarize, everyone has an individual tolerance, I guess we can say, in terms of how dehydrated they can get. And I think Dr. Lewis James has put out some interesting research about trying to assess, hey, are there levels of tolerance that we can take here? But what I'm hearing you say, Stavros, and correct me if I'm wrong, your sweat rate is extremely important here. Everyone's going to have an individual sweat rate, which is going to determine your losses, let's say per hour, and then whatever event you're doing and the intensity of that event will determine how long you're going to be sweating for. So if you're sweating at, say, 1 liter per hour, but you're running just over a 2-hour marathon, which you said is incredibly fast, you're only going to be losing 2 liters in that entire distance, right? So maybe that 2 liters as a percentage of your body weight isn't going to get so bad that it's going to have really drastic performance detriments. Whereas if you assess someone else who, say, is a very high sweater, let's say 2 liters per hour, but then they run much slower and they're out on the course for, let's say, 4 hours, and let's just ignore osmotic gradients and let's just assume that we sweat 2 liters an hour the whole time, which doesn't happen, but let's just assume it. Let's just say, in theory, that's 8 liters. The percentage body weight is going to be much greater, and that person, as you're saying, will have to sacrifice some intensity. They'll have to stop and they'll have to get that dehydration under control, because it's very, very likely that that will be a detriment to their performance. Is that where we're at with that?
Exactly. So the athlete that was referring earlier, it was Alberto Salazar. You probably could guess it. And Alberto was nearly 4 liters per hour sweater. So it was one of the heaviest sweaters you can find probably in the literature. So when you lose that much, it's like, don't run marathon. If you can improve your 10K, maybe go for a 10K. Or if you run marathon, don't run hot marathons. Train to run a cooler marathon. Uh, so there are cases like that you're genetically quite often predisposed to be like on those extreme cases. Which, like the case of Alberto Salazar, they did all sorts of preparation, they did all sorts of tricks, trying to minimize the degree of dehydration. When he ran the 1984 Olympics, did. He had the best time on the world at the time, and in the winter in the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, he did really poorly, and it was a very hot and humid day, and he could not perform, and that was that simple.
Can you expand on that, Stavros? Because we've touched on that about 3 times now. But explain to us, what relationship is there between the dehydration and the heat? Why is that affecting the performance? Why can he perform really well when it's cooler, but then not when it's hotter? If his sweat rate, explain that to us.
So when dehydration happens, one of the so your body has to sacrifice some things to keep your body going. So one of the things that your body is trying to do, especially when you exercise in the heat, is regulate temperature, which is important. And how you regulate temperature, there are two things that your body does. One is what we call scientifically peripheral vasodilation. So your vessels dilate, your skin gets redder, so the heat gets transferred from the core, from the exercising muscles to the surface, to the skin, and then it will be easier for that heat to be dissipated to the environment. If the environment allows, if it is a little bit cooler than your skin. So you can transfer the heat and transfer it to the environment. One of the issues of dilating the vasculature on your skin is that if you're dehydrated and you have less blood because your blood volume has shrunk, then if you also dilate, your blood pressure is going to drop. So your body has to decide, should I regulate my blood pressure better and not pass out of hypotension? Like, do I want my blood pressure to go 60 over 40, but I will be able to thermoregulate? Or should I sacrifice a little bit long-term thermoregulation, but not faint? So your body every time is going to peak. Let's regulate blood pressure much better. So as soon as you get a little bit dehydrated, what your body does, it doesn't vasodilate as much in your skin. So it's more difficult for your body to transfer the heat from the internal part of your body to the surface. So it's number one line of defense, that one of the first defenses that your body does. So your body is like, let's save the amount of water that I need. Number one, don't pee much. Number two, don't sweat much. Number three, don't vasodilate. So all these things that your body will do when you start getting dehydrated, it's end up increasing your body temperature. Then you start getting hotter, then your performance also declines. If you look in the literature, it seems that for every 1% of dehydration, for any given intensity, your body temperature seems to be about half a degree Celsius higher than if you were well hydrated. So it's quite crazy to see it. Like, we have seen that over and over in dehydration less than 2%. We see dehydration with 1%, and we see body temperature deficits or higher levels of body temperature even with 1%. In 1.5%, you see like small water deficit, and your body knows it, and it's trying to defend you immediately. So I'm going back to what I was saying earlier. Your body knows, and it responds appropriately. It just doesn't let you know that what is happening sometimes, and you probably are not even thirsty. You feel okay.
So just to summarize all of that, Stavros, because I think we've painted a really good picture before I ask you the last question, which is, okay, what do we do with the strategies? But just summarizing that, if you're someone who wants to optimize their performance, very good idea to keep this within 2%. If you can, within 1% body weight loss. You want to do that. To understand how to do that, you need to know what your sweat losses are. You need to understand how much you need to put in order to stay within that range. And you need to assess, okay, how long am I going to be out there? What is the total losses? Is this even plausible for me to do? Like you said, if you're a big sweater and you live in a hot, humid environment, maybe it's not the best idea for you to go run a marathon. Just focus on your 10K time. And I guess, Stavros, and I'll get your opinion on this. This is probably why we see at the really elite level, you probably see these guys are lower sweaters than, say, the average person. They probably sweat a little less because it disrupts their system, or they've got some very good tolerances within their gut that they can take on this fluid. Because from what I'm hearing from you, Stavros, if this goes wrong, if your hydration system goes wrong, there's a cascade of problems. You don't pee, you don't sweat, you don't vasodilat, which leads to you overheating, amongst a bunch of other problems, which just lead to you blowing up. So staying on your hydration, very, very important.
Absolutely. It was you did a very good summary of all that latest conversation.
So,
There are many complications. There is the natural selection. You see, it's often you see even body size of people. You see in very hot places, they're skinnier. I mean, not running by itself because it's so much. It's a truly weight bearing event. You see, a certain body type. But in other events that the temperature is very high, and cycling, for instance, you see in hot events, smaller cyclists tend to perform better, for instance, because they produce less metabolic heat. It's a little bit easier to thermoregulate than if you have somebody a little bit bigger with bigger muscle volume, that you burn more energy, you produce more metabolic heat. It gets a little bit more complicated to release that extra heat.
to our very last question, and Stavros, to tie it all together, what do we do? How do we stay hydrated then? What do we drink? How much do we drink? And how do we go about doing it?
So going back to on how to develop the individualized strategy or individualized hydration protocol, just practice, and how much you sweat is not difficult to assess. So body weight changes in an hour run, or you can do it in less than an hour. Do 30 minutes run. I mean, warm up. Try the intensity that you are planning to run a race. Do 30 minutes run. Don't drink anything to make your calculations a little bit easier. Pre-post difference in body weight. This is how much you sweat. So fairly quickly, you can get an idea of how much you're losing. I'll and that will define your sweat rate. So if you do an hour run and you lose 1.5 kilos, then it's your sweating rate. It's 1.5 liters per hour. So you have to drink very close to that, taking into consideration that you might end up peeing some. Also at the same time, hopefully you don't have to pee too much in endurance events. You don't want to stop for a peeing break. And when you're losing and when you're exercising, actually the exercise by itself increases antidiuretic hormone, so it slows down urination. So most people don't pee that much. The people that you see that are peeing excessively in races, there are people that they really overdoing it either before or during the race, and they have this kind of symptoms.
So, Stavros, we want to measure the sweat rate and then we want to drink pretty close to that. What are we drinking? Is it just Gatorade, sports drinks, water, electrolytes? What's best?
So it depends on the event. If the event is short, I would say if your event is probably under like, if you're competing in anything under 10K, nobody drinks. So it probably doesn't matter. Plus you're going so fast. Plus it's something that you don't really need. For events that I would say from half marathon and up or 20K, so when you're over 1 hour, other than hydration, I think it is important to replenish carbohydrates, because the approximately over the 1.5 hours is when you start reaching, when you're going very high intensity, you start depleting your body's carbohydrate stores. So it's important also to replenish carbohydrates. The sport drinks have this nice combination that by concentrating on drinking one thing, you also get at the same time energy in a form of carbohydrate and water. Then the electrolytes are also important, especially when the events start getting a little bit longer. So over 1.5 hours, then the electrolytes play a significant role. So adding electrolytes, it also helps you with replacing the electrolytes that you lose via sweat. If your event is about an hour, probably hydration, carbohydrate, the carbohydrates on the top of hydration and electrolytes might not have a massive benefit, I would say, if the event is around an hour, but anything above an hour, then it is very important. The longer you get, the more into the ultra events that they last 5, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24-hour races, ultra over 100 Ks or multi-day events, etc., then the hydration is extremely important. And also what is extremely important is also electrolyte balance. So because you have such a massive turnover of your body stores and your electrolytes that it's very easy to develop hyponatremia. So your body can start losing a significant amount of electrolytes. And then if you don't replace them, then you can have a major not only deficit in performance, but you can have major side effects for your health.
Excellent. So if we're summarizing that, Stavros, we come back to this formula where figure out what your sweat rate is. If you're doing a shorter event, 10K, maybe even a half marathon, don't worry about it too much. If you want to optimize it, go to a cool city so you don't have the heat stress as well. That'll really make it a lot easier for you.
Will make you run faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure people can appreciate that. If you're a big sweater, you're probably going to have a harder time with these events. And if you're planning on doing anything over a 10K, probably look to go to a cool city, and that's going to be your best bet. If you want to do longer events, then you have to really start looking at, okay, we need to be making sure we're getting in the fluid to keep us in the 2%, ideally 1% dehydration drink so you can stay within that. You need to be getting carbohydrate in there to keep your energy going. Plus, you need to be getting a decent amount of electrolytes to make sure that we're not throwing off the osmolality or the concentration of our plasma volume that we spoke about earlier. Is that correct?
Yes, this is excellent. And one simple thing that you can do, I think, even if you're a little bit overwhelmed of the information but you want to do something just to get an idea, probably the single simplest thing you can do just to get an idea where you are, whether there is anything that you need to fix or not, just measure your body weight without clothes before you start practice and after you finish practice. And that could be for many people is eye-opening to have an idea how much you lose. People don't understand how much they lose. And I do that. I do it when I teach classes on thermoregulation and fluid balance. I do it with elite athletes that they used to work a little bit more when I lived in Europe, when I lived in Greece, and that I used to work with a lot of elite athletes. They would be like totally surprised when I will collect the data and I will show them how much weight they lose just by having a soccer practice or having a 2 hour cycling ride or outdoor or indoor track practice, etc. It's really eye opening to get an idea how much you lose. I'll give you an example with me when I do cycling, especially in the summer. I know Phoenix is the hottest city in America. So we tend to go out really early in the morning, like 5 a.m., 5:30. We meet and we go out and we do like 2, 3 hours ride. And we try to be done by 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock, be done, go back home, and stay indoors to avoid the massive heat. But I will wake up in the morning, I will drink well, I will go for practice. I will carry 2 large water bottles. I have two 750 ml. I also have one 900 ml if it is super hot that I carry. Then halfway into the ride, we will stop somewhere, refill, and have extra. Finish my ride. I will drink some if we have met somewhere farther from my home. I will drink some in the car. I'll go back home and I'll weigh myself before I take a shower. And I will look at the scale and I will be like minus 2 kilos. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, what happened? I'm like, look, I've been drinking nonstop. And occasionally I drink more after I finish and I eat something in the middle. I'm like, what is happening? Like you cannot keep up drinking. It's just this is how much your body loses, and quite often you don't even understand. So just measuring your practice pre post body weight, you don't have to do it all the time. but do it a few times just to get an idea where you are, where you stand. It could be really, really helpful for many athletes.
Absolutely. And this information has been amazing. Dr. Kavouras, I'm very mindful of your time and thankful that you've given us all this info. There are two quick questions I ask everyone that come on the podcast. Very last two. We'll keep them to under 60 seconds each. But very first one, how do you define performance? And I'll preface this that one of my really good friends that I've run and trained with, he's a fighter jet pilot. He asked me this on a run and it really made me stop and think. And I thought, wow, that's a great question. How do I define performance? How do you define performance, Stavros?
This is a good question. So I'll tell you how we used to define performance in a laboratory setting when we were measuring performance. So we manipulate hydration. We're trying to measure performance. So we define performance nowadays versus like we take events or activities that are very close to real exercise performance events like cycling races or 10K running or 5K running or whatever, how fast you complete a certain distance, whether it is in the treadmill or in a bike, etc. Performance is it's a very wide term. So performance is for a grandma that is able to get off her bed without any assistance. Performance is like if my father can go to the bathroom on his own. Performance if somebody who cannot hear well can wear a hearing aid and perform better because now they can hear better. Performance is also having somebody who is running a marathon at 2:07 and you can help them to improve their performance around 2:06. So the spectrum is extremely large in exercise science and in sports nutrition. We tend to associate performance with exercise performance. Probably talking with your pilot friend, good performance would be that he returns and lands if he's a Air Force fighting pilot, that he returns every time and he makes it home after a mission. This is performance. Performance is reaching target every time, So it's a very broad term. Something that we used to do in the past, and I think most of us have walked away from this type of performance, we used to use time to exhaustion. We'll set up some sort of resistance. We'll put people in the bike, crank the resistance to some random percent of VO2 max, and we'll make people to cycle till they could not cycle anymore. So cycle till you drop, which is, there is no Olympic event like that. There is no race that you run till you cannot run anymore. So we have kind of like walked away from that paradigm.
Excellent, excellent. Very last question, Stavros. What does performance mean to you in your own personal life?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about it. Um, uh, Again, there are many aspects of performance. I think staying with in the peloton with my fellow cyclists, I think it's a performance to me. Not being dropped in the group, I think it's a performance. Being able to stay active and enjoy life uh, without having problems that other friends of mine might have in my age. It's performance. It's something extremely subjective. You see people that are disappointed that they cannot run a marathon under 4 hours in after the age of 60, and there are other people that are happy in their 20s to finish a 5K. So it's quite subjective. What is your personal goal? I remember a few years ago when I had the elite performance practice in Greece. I had the cyclist that came to my office. He was 70 something years old, and he came to me because he was complaining that in rides over 3 hours, he was getting muscle cramps. And he was like very predictable, and it will happen almost every time. It was an easy fix. It was like he was not taking any electrolytes and everything. But at the same time, and I'm a cyclist myself, and I've worked with elite master athletes, etc. You talk to an average human being and you say, somebody who is 70 years old that cannot ride without cramps over 3 hours in the heat is complaining. It's a little bit mind blowing, but one of my buddies that we cycle together, he's around that age group and he's super good cyclist, and I enjoy riding with him every time I do. Uh, so you set your own limits of performance, and you compare yourself with yourself. I think this is performance, and for me, it's like to be able to enjoy what I want to do until I get really old.
That's a fantastic answer, and I'm very conscious of time, so I won't take up any more of it. If people are listening to this, Dr. Kavouras, how can they get in touch with you? Are you on socials? Can they email you? What's the best way for them to follow your work?
I'm in most social, and my tag is usually Dr. Hydration. So if you look me up in Instagram, Twitter, which I haven't been using Twitter as much lately, and probably I won't use that much in the future. Uh, but probably Instagram, Facebook, Dr. Hydration is where you can find me. LinkedIn, I'm in all social, I would say. Not that active in TikTok. And we don't know whether we will have TikTok for much longer, or maybe we will.
Yeah, who knows? That's a whole episode on itself. But Dr. Stavros, thank you so much. That's an excellent episode. So much great knowledge, and I'm sure so many people get a lot of good takeaways from that. So hopefully I'll see you in Arizona in a couple months' time. But until then, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye. Stay hydrated.